Hello and welcome to the Power and Politics podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Cohen, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Kanthan Pillay onto the show. Kanthan, how are you doing?
Matt, good to see you again. It's been a while since we were last over at the podcast party, I think it was.
Yeah, that's correct. It has been a while, almost a year. Although it certainly hasn't been a quiet one. I saw that your last, I saw that panel discussion you had with the podcast party really went viral.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. When one tosses in little snippets that people can relate to, and just for the benefit of people who might not have seen the clips, interestingly, those clips were not produced by a podcast party. They're random TikTokers.
Really?
Who have been taking these clips and putting them up on their own channels, which from a messaging point of view, I think is great because, it draws people back to the source material. But I think the reason why that kind of struck a nerve is because in this country, we're entirely dependent upon the automobile industry, upon cars, and upon everything that goes with that. And I think that was the reason why the clips kind of picked up and really went viral. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really was. And it's actually one of the topics I was really hoping to talk to you today, especially since it's something that you put in your book. So before we begin, if you don't mind showing us all the cover of your book, just so that we can plug it in right here.
Great, thanks a lot.
So we have... All right, How to Fix South Africa, an owner's manual. And then, yes, if you're somebody like me who likes that compact portability of the Kindle, you can get the Kindle version as well. As far as I'm aware, it is still available on the Amazon Kindle store, right, Kanthan?
It is available on the Amazon Kindle store. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, you get it for nothing, which is a great deal, really. So,
even better.
If you're a subscriber to Kindle Unlimited, then you get it for nothing. But apart from that, I do have a website, which is how to fix sa.co.za, and which tells you all the other places where you can get it. But most bookstores still have it. I mean, Exclusive Books, for example, has it. But I like the smaller independent bookstores like Clark's and in Cape Town, and Loving Books up here in Johannesburg, who were among the first to carry it. So, go out and support your small independent bookstores, people. They're good for the country and they're good for us.
Right, let's do that. And I'll be sure to also include the link to the website in the description box below so people can be sure to check it out. So yeah, Kanthan, a lot to talk about. And I really want to start with one of the topics that you brought up in your book, specifically how to fix the South African economy, right? Because as we know, no matter what sort of issues we look at in South Africa, because of course there are plenty of problems, I think we can all kind of agree that no matter where the problems lie, it all sort of happens to be connected back to the economy. It always seems to have that same root issue. And something that really resonated with me in your book, because I'm a big oil and gas guy, is you spoke about extracting shale gas in the Karoo and sort of reviving the economy in that way. Could you maybe talk us through that?
Sure. So it comes from the understanding that the fundamental driver of any economy, and indeed every economic boom across the course of history, has been energy. Now, you consider, if you go back to the end of the 19th century, the reason why we were hunting whales in many parts of the world was that we were extracting whale oil, and we were using that to do all sorts of nefarious things. But then we discovered crude oil. And at the point at which we discovered crude oil, that immediately unlocked all sorts of technologies that were a direct result of that. So one can look in terms of the direct implications in terms of, relatively cheap and relatively unlimited energy that came at the time as a direct result of the petroleum revolution. But then think of all of the industries that spun off as a result of that. So plastics, for example, were a direct result of the spin-off. All sorts of medicinal products were a direct result. But it comes back to the point that if you have unlimited cheap energy, that becomes the fundamental driver of the economy. And correspondingly, if the cost of energy goes up, your ability to run a competitive economy dwindles quite drastically. Now, a lot of this realization has actually been reinforced by the war in Ukraine, because everyone predicted that Russia would simply roll over and die as a direct result of that conflict, and as a result of the sanctions that were imposed upon them. But because of the fact that Russia has its own energy supply, it was able to completely ride out those sanctions, because when you have cheap, unlimited energy, which Russia does, everything else kind of flows from that. So, perspective in terms of our country right now, we consume roughly 600,000 barrels of oil per day, which, is an interesting figure in of itself. But so ring fence that and put it aside. Now, so 600,000 barrels of oil per day is what we need in order to run this country. So every motor vehicle, every minibus taxi, every diesel truck, every diesel train, where you happen to find them still running, they entirely dependent upon that fuel supply. On the other hand, we are only producing around 170,000 barrels of oil per day, and that's in the form of stuff that gets produced by Sasol. So everything else has to be currently imported. So there's a double whammy that hits us now in terms of the overall impact to the economy as a direct result of the cost of fuel. Because if you just simply measure that amount of money that we are spending on a daily basis, and look, I could, crunch the numbers very quickly based on the current price of oil per barrel, and then you just simply do the rand dollar conversion rate on that. But if you look in terms of the difference between the Zuma administration and the Ramaphosa administration, the amount of money that we are spending in terms of our fuel costs is in the order of hundreds of billions per year. Now, the point around extracting oil from shale, and, there have been very comprehensive studies that have been done that show how accessible the reserves are in the Karoo and how easy it would be to access them and how cost effective it would be to access them, which have been delayed for a number of reasons, all of which have been spuriously based on environmentalism. But let's park that discussion. The critical thing is that if you do a comparison between ourselves and one of our neighbors, and that's Angola. In South Africa right now, we pay around just under 22 Rand a litre for unleaded fuel up here on the high front.
Right.
The corresponding cost in Angola, across in Luanda, if you fill up your car there, is roughly around 6 Rand a litre, if one converts it in terms of US dollars. Now, consider the impact it would have on the South African economy if we had fuel at 6 Rand a litre. Immediately, it would open up profitability for businesses which currently are not able to make themselves profitable simply because they're not in a position to afford the logistics of getting their products from one part of the country to the other. So you'll find, for example, that a lot of the, particularly in terms of Cape Town, there's lots of, the Western Cape, there's lots of winemakers that produce really excellent wines, but not in large enough quantities to make their way onto the supply shelves of the larger retailers. If they had access to very cheap fuel at a fraction of the cost, they would be able to ship those to people around the country, direct to doorstep, and still maintain profitability. And that's just one example that we are pulling out. So, yes, the cost of fuel fundamentally becomes the driver of the economy, but it also affects us at a secondary level because that means that is export revenue that we are generating, and we need to speak about it in the context of the United States, especially because that's one of the primary sources for us right now. in terms of foreign
Of course.
exchange to then allow us to buy oil. So we get in money from places like the United States and Europe, which are the countries where we have a trade surplus with. And then we spend that money on suppliers in the Middle East, primarily Saudi Arabia, in order to be able to get access to fuel. So if we were exploiting our shale reserves in the first place, we are able to produce fuel at a significantly cheaper price. But secondly, our forex is not leaving our shores. So it ends up being
So,
profitable for us at two levels.
right. So sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, so when we talk about the discrepancy in fuel price, so between South Africa and Angola, is that mostly due to the fact that South Africa does not have that self dependency and that we're overly reliant on exports?
That's absolutely correct, yes, because we effectively import oil at the current international oil price. And the current international oil price, remember, is subject to fluctuation based on a number of circumstances. The main reason why oil is as expensive as it is right now is because of supply constraints. So, three of the biggest suppliers of oil in the world, which are Russia and Iran and Venezuela,
Your
effectively have their
OPEC
supply chains.
grouping.
Yes, those chains are interdicted, which means that effectively that then leaves us with OPEC and with the United States. Now, the United States, by the way, I must tell you, is the single biggest producer of oil in the world. People are not actually aware of that. But um, obviously, they're also the single biggest consumer at the same time,
Right.
and,
Of course.
and so not enough of their supply actually gets exported, enough to have a dampening effect on the global price of oil. So, yes, would it be good for us at a geopolitical level if Russia and Iran and Venezuela, whatever you might think of their politics, were allowed to sell into the open market? Yes, it would be. But how much better would it be if we were not reliant upon any of those supplies and able to exploit what's literally under our own soil? The simple answer from my
Right.
perspective.
That is. But Kanthan, could you just give a bit of an insight as to why this hasn't happened yet?
Well, the primary reason is that we've had an extraordinary influence on the political system in the country on the part of external players. So we have NGOs who have been committed to a green agenda, who have spent a massive amount of money to essentially stymie lots of these processes in our courts. And again, you've had activist judges who have been very happy to do exactly the same thing. So not only has it been the case in terms of the activists around fracking shale in the Karoo, but it also has been in terms of exploiting the provable oil reserves that we have off the Wild Coast in the Eastern Cape, where all of those processes have been stopped simply because of court action. And this is court action that has been funded by overseas players who are proponents of the green lobby, and they have very deep pockets from a legal point of view, and they're able to afford lawyers who are able to tie up processes for years. And because of the fact that we are a constitutional democracy by and large, we have to respect those processes. Now, China, for example, doesn't have to give a hoot about such things. China will exploit
Right.
whatever reserves are at its disposal and is able to actually blossom as a result. The US, by the way, was tied up for the entire duration of the Biden administration as a direct result of this. There was a significant oil pipeline that was shut down by Biden on his first day, which immediately had an impact on the global price of oil. But I digress on that point. But the primary reason is that, firstly, we have a government that doesn't actually appreciate the importance of putting these processes first. It's far easier for the minister to support something like the car power ships because That's essentially a contract to an external player, which means that there's an opportunity for the ruling party to loot along the way. So it's an entirely different perspective to what is now happening in the Sahel, where you have, Ibrahim Traore, for example, who is essentially a military dictator, who is now, pretty much doing whatever he wants to do in the interest of exploiting the natural resources of the country in the best interests of the country. And he's able to do that by and large because those legal impediments to progress are not there. So, yeah, at that level, democracy and the democratic process actually ends up biting us at a number of levels.
Right. It's that same system where the bureaucracy bites us again. Yeah, I totally understand that. And I just think, unfortunately, that's such a great pity, because I know in your book, and also I saw the verified figure online, you were correct in saying this, that there's about 500 trillion cubic feet of shale gas nestled under the Karoo. And not to stray too far from South Africa, but I'd love to bring up the example of Guyana. Reason being that Guyana, for those who may not know, is in South America. It's on the Caribbean, and it's always been quite an impoverished country. However, in 2015, ExxonMobil began exploring Guyana for its offshore oil and gas reserves. And they discovered around 17 trillion cubic feet of shale gas reserves. And then I think about 11 billion recoverable barrels of oil, something along those lines. But here's what really fascinates me, is that, putting all party politics aside, right, they just decided to go ahead with it. They saw it as a clear moneymaker. They knew that they just do not have a strong enough economy. They do not have any other bustling sectors. And so they decided, we're going to go all in on oil and gas. Doesn't matter what the green agenda is. And I think in 2024, their economy grew by over 40%, primarily due to the oil and gas sector's growth. And then, of course, other areas such as tourism, infrastructure, transport grew as a result of that as well. And so it pushed the economy up by 40% in 1 year, which is remarkable, to say the least. And then we're here with an economy slowing down to 0% GDP growth. So I think we better take a page out of the Guyana playbook there.
No, that's absolutely right. And in fact, what I'm doing as we are talking right now is I'm firing up the presentation of a recent class that I give to my trainees. So, one of the things that I do on the side is to actually teach a number of interns in media. And look, I basically do this on the basis that if you can inform people around the importance of the economy, then people are able to better engage in public discourse. And so one of the things that I brought up, and I'll just read it out to you very quickly. The oil price round about this time is roughly $64 a barrel. And the oil shortfall costs right now for us per day we are talking about. So on the assumption that we were at 8 Rand 37 to the dollar, which is where we were in 2008, at that stage, 500,000 barrels a day was costing us 269 million Rand a day as a country. Then when we move forward to the Zuma era, at 12.37 to the US dollar, the shortfall went up to 398 million Rand a day that we are paying. And right now, at the current price tag of roughly 18 to the US dollar, we are paying 580 million Rand a day. That is 500 million Rand a day that we are spending on importing oil. And it's an astonishing figure. if you think
It
about it. So
is.
every 2 days, we are spending R1 billion that is flying out of the country and is making the Saudis rich and is impoverishing us. And simply, if that money were being spent in the country, we would be better off. But then, if you also consider by exploiting our own resources, we would be spending a fraction of that. It's a double win. And I cannot understand for the life of me why the Democratic Alliance in particular is not jumping on this bandwagon, because it is such an obvious win for the country. But again, it's a point that I always make, that they are so wedded to the green agenda that it actually cripples us as a country. This is the effective way to make our country incredibly prosperous. And at the point at which you're able to unlock the savings as a direct result of these energy costs, just think of, how much money per year. Literally every 2 days, you're freeing up R1 billion to spend on more useful projects. You're able to spend it on infrastructure, you're able to spend it on education, you're able to increase the number of police officers. It all comes back to the cost of
Of
energy.
course.
And the thing is, Donald Trump gets this better than any other person, which is why he's completely upended the entire green agenda and his entire thing about drill, baby, drill.
Right.
You're seeing the immediate impact in terms of, the U.S. economy immediately hitting all-time highs, the price of fuel very rapidly backtracking from the Biden era, and the overall impact on inflation on everything, because all of your logistics, all of it comes back to the cost of energy.
Well, that's exactly why I think this is such an important point to write home. And I'm so glad that you gave that explanation there, Kanthan, because what people seem to not quite understand, I think more and more people are starting to, fortunately, is that no matter how many problems South Africa seems to have as a country, it all in one way or another relates back to the economy. And then, of course, once you drill down into the economy, excuse the pun, you start to see how every aspect sort of relates back to the energy issue. Because then, of course, we have the other side of it, which we haven't spoken about, which, of course, is, energy provision, power stability, load shedding, etc. But I would actually like to ask you about the policing situation as well, Kanthan, because something you said during your podcast party appearance really resonated with me. And it's something that you also included in your book, I noticed, which is the fact that we've got so many unemployed graduates, right, who are just not finding work, and yet a huge shortfall of police officers. And so I'd like to know if you could maybe elaborate on what you see your plan as being for basically fixing the police service and tackling crime.
So, interestingly, after that particular discussion, which you just mentioned, we had figures that were released that showed that there were 1 million applications for 5,000 jobs as trainees in the police. And so there were a couple of problems that we highlighted in that discussion, and which I talk about in the book as well. The main problem from my perspective in terms of why crime becomes an issue for us right now is that you have flaws in terms of the charge sheets, so that when the criminal finally appears in court, they get tossed out on the basis that the police officer who filled out the charge sheet 9 times out of 10 is not able to read, write, or count correctly. So that's one. It's an exaggeration on my part, but I'm saying to you that right. When you look in terms of the reasons why cases get thrown out, it's generally because of the fact that there are fundamental flaws in terms of the docket. So there are other issues that we spoke about, for, where dockets get lost, which is a separate issue. But I promise you that if you do a straw poll among people that you speak to on a daily basis and ask them about the engagement that they have when they go into a police station, where generally you will find a number of people that are basically lazing around, and there's one person behind the desk, and you try to issue a statement, and they will very carefully write it out, very long form, very slowly, with all sorts of spelling errors, and generally completely missing the gist of what you are putting on the table. And, more often than not, have to turn around and say, no, that's not what I said. You need to cross that out and rewrite it. And then the person behind the counter says, no, but that's what you mean. And I say, no, that is not what I said. I don't know whether you've actually had this experience of going into a police station and having this happen to you. So there are a couple of things that I offered as solutions to that. Firstly, you need to have a situation where there is an audit trail in terms of the charge sheet, and that has to be at the level of immediately when you draw up the charge sheet or when you file the complaint. It has to be digitally captured, and it has to be then cloud stored, so that the police officer on the ground there, or any of the intervening officers, is not in a position to then destroy the docket. Because physical dockets get lost. But as soon as you have a digital audit trail, immediately you're getting rid of that problem. Now, one can understand that there are issues where you might want to have confidentiality in the docket, but that's fine. The important thing is that one should not be able to destroy the docket. One can arrange that there are levels of confidentiality that get assigned to the docket at various stages so that only appropriate people have access to it. But no person in the chain of command should ever have the ability to destroy a piece of information once it has been captured.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And just to go back to the situation where you said you were over-exaggerating, yes, I did gather that, but I think the thing that alarms me more, Kanthan, is the fact that even if, let's say, there's one police officer or 1 out of 100 or even 1 out of 1,000 that can't read or write, just in my view as an outsider, that just sounds completely illogical, completely impractical, because, I mean, is filling out a docket not an essential part of the job? I mean,
well, the question of why the dockets get filled out by hand, of themselves, is an interesting point, because it should be an essential skill that the police officer is able to actually type it into a computer immediately. But then, of course, you get this entire thing about systems being down and so forth, which again is. It's a logistical problem that needs to be solved by having competent frameworks that are in place that are actually accountable based on the service level agreements to ensure that those systems are actually working. These things are able to be successfully implemented around the world. There's no reason why we can't be doing the same thing out here. And, by the same token, the simple act right now of taking down a statement, we have the ability to have speech-to-text transcription taking place so that you can literally have the person speak into the computer and get it taken down immediately and filed into the system as part of that docket or complaint or whatever it is that you are bringing up. So these are all solvable problems. So crime ultimately becomes something that we can solve by exposing all of the processes that currently prevent the crime eventually making its way to court. 9 times out of 10, and again, I'm using this as an exaggeration.
Right.
Processes don't. So, firstly, we know that most people don't bother to report most crimes.
Yeah, we see that especially when it comes to those of a sexual nature as well.
Yes, but just the sheer process of needing to go through dealing with incompetence at the level of the police stations. The reason why most of us will take the trouble to go and actually report thefts is because when we need to make an insurance claim, we need to be able to say, we went down to the police station and we filed a report, and here is the docket number. And the insurance company is never going to follow up on the docket number. The insurance company just needs that to tick a box on their claim sheet so that they can then go through the process of saying, yes, a theft has actually occurred, as opposed to my making it up and saying I was robbed when I wasn't. And
Right.
I suppose it's so that they can hit you with perjury if it turns out that there was, in fact, no robbery that took place. So we will report things like accidents because of insurance claims. We will
Of
report
course.
things like robberies because of insurance claims. Um, Things like rapes don't get reported for a number of reasons, and those reasons are far more complicated. So I think we could probably spend an hour or so talking about this, but in most cases, the reason why rapes don't get reported is because the perpetrator is known to the victim, and the victim is actually dependent on the perpetrator. And therefore, if you have a situation where the person is effectively a breadwinner, if you send the breadwinner to jail, you're going to starve. And that
Right.
ends up being, a far more complicated reason for why crimes don't end up getting reported. And there's no easy solution to that particular problem because, how do we provide a safety net for people who have been raped if they are dependent on the rapist being there? I don't know the answer to that because that's a larger problem, and that's not a problem of economics. That's really a problem of our societal structures and support bases, which historically used to be provided by um, religious institutions. So for example, you would have uh, you know, churches and synagogues and mosques and temples who would be responsible for, providing support structures and fundraising from their communities to ensure that people were taken care of. But
Right.
now we have this understanding that government is meant to do all of these things for us, and of course, government has no personal interest in you. So yes, that's a problem that we're not able to solve. But fixing policing, yes, at the most fundamental level, we spoke about the idea that we have 800,000 unemployed university graduates in the country. And
Right.
so when you have an abundance of educated people, just change the conditions for entry into the police force so that you have to have a degree to be able to get in. And we know immediately there are 5,000 jobs available out of 800,000 unemployed graduates that we have out there. What's the possibility that we are going to get 5,000 people from there that want to be police officers, especially if they're unemployed? I think it's
Well,
huge.
yes, I think the numbers stack up. And I think also it just, this is a bit of a side point, but it also brings us the issue that I think faces a lot of the youth today, which is that we all seem to be in that frame of mind that when we go to university and we study a certain course, whatever it is that we're studying, that is the job we're going to get. So the moment that you finish up your LLB, great, I'm off to do articles. I'm going to be an attorney. See you later. Same with other fields as well, whether you're an accountant, whatnot. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that in this day and age, especially with the way that supply and demand is changing and technology, of course, you've got to sometimes pivot. And certain roles that were extremely relevant a few years ago are losing their relevancy today. So I think that's actually a very innovative solution, Kanthan, because yes, there may be those, young unemployed graduates that think, right, I didn't study to become a police officer, but maybe they also need to answer the question, well, there clearly isn't a job available for me in the field that I studied. And so what do I do? How do I put food on the table? But
Oh,
you also brought up a, sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 please go on.
Oh, all right. No, I actually just wanted to bring up another really interesting point that you brought up, which was the privatization of police, because something that I see, which is a major issue, right, is that there's a very low amount of police officers throughout the country. Last time I checked, it was about 180,000 active police officers throughout South Africa. But then if you look at the rate of officers available in the private security sector, there's about 450,000 private security guards who are active at this moment in time, which is more than double the number of police officers who are available. So, yes, how do you basically see that whole scenario playing out?
So there's a couple of things that come into play here. So one of the significant points that we need to take a look at, by the way, specifically in the context of policing, is the fact that only the South African Police Services currently has the ability to effectively be crime fighters. And municipal police actually do not have that ability, in most cases to make arrests and so forth. So interestingly, fairly recently, there was let me just call it up very quickly. Government Gazette
Sure, go
number
for it.
52884, published 10 June, proposes sweeping changes to the powers of the municipal police. So there's a number of acts of, and by the way, if you go to kanthanpillay.com, it's the top story there where it talks about the various aspects of law that reserved the ability to actually follow up on particular crimes and made them the preserve of SAPS. And now, effectively, what is being proposed is that those powers also be extended to municipal police, so that they too are able to prosecute those crimes. And this, by the way, I must tell you, is a great step forward, because it means that metro police in places where we have them, which is primarily the big municipalities, are able to now go after real criminals in addition to just simply writing out parking tickets, which is what their
Right,
historic role has been, to stop us at
right.
speed traps and
Roadblocks
roadblocks
and speeding
and so
fines.
forth. The proposal that I had in my book, which was really something that I discovered when I was still a student in the US, and at the Princeton campus, the campus security guards, I only discovered after I'd gotten there, were actually deputized New Jersey state troopers.
Oh,
They happen. They're on the payroll of Princeton University, but they all have full policing powers. And in times of emergency, the state policing authorities are able to call upon them as part of a reserve force. And what I was proposing is that we look at all of these private security companies and actually put all of their personnel through a training process where they are effectively becoming, shall we say, reserve police officers with the power to arrest and prosecute particular crimes. And so there are
right.
two advantages to this. You're immediately increasing the number of people on the ground who are actually able to act upon criminality. So in my neighborhood, as an example, the armed response people will often apprehend criminals, but will have to wait for the police to then eventually pitch up to actually make the arrest and book them. And again, you'll go back to the old problem where the dockets get lost and these criminals are out on the street in a short space of time. Whereas if the private security people were actually deputized to function as police officers, they themselves would be able to then take the criminals across to the police station, fill out the charge sheets themselves, and ensure that the entire process goes through. And
Right.
the overall impact of this also means that they then become they fall under the aegis of the police directorate in terms of ensuring that they are complying with the rules of policing. So to ensure that they are not, doing things that they're not supposed to do, which makes
Yes.
effectively puts them under the authority of the what is it called? IPID, the the police and investigative directive. I think it's called. I spell it out in the book, but yes.
Okay.
So the entire idea is to find the most cost-effective way that we can to immediately increase our ability to tackle criminality at the lowest possible cost, which is the theme that I look at throughout the entire book. It's about, can we make this work with what we have? I think most governments around the world, the solution that they have is to throw money at a problem. But,
Right.
throwing money at a problem should be the last thing that we do.
Right. Well, that's actually such an intuitive way of looking at it, because in reality, what you effectively saying is we've got this sort of illiteracy problem, right? But then at the same time, you have your private security guards who can sort of join. They're CIRA registered. They've got their requirements their performance requirements that they've had to meet. And then at the same time, you've got this understaffing problem. And while you can, of course, see university graduates who are unemployed can join the policing service, before you even have to enroll them and train them, you've got private security jumping in. And I think that's really important. And something that definitely brings to mind is response times for crimes, right? Because generally, if you in an area where you see these private security firms and they have their patrol vehicles cruising around, what's great about that is that it's a preventative measure, right? And so on one hand, when criminals, or let's call them potential criminals, see these sort of security measures, it may dissuade them from committing crimes. But even if, let's say, they do take a chance to commit crimes, at least the patrol vehicles and the first responders are in the area in order to respond. Whereas sometimes I wonder, does it make sense to, solely rely on the police to respond? Because at the end of the day, I don't know, would the nearest response vehicle be in the vicinity? How far is the nearest police station? And yes, also just the fact that unfortunately, when you do call the police, that's after the crime has been committed, not before. So that's why I particularly like your idea of incorporating the private security sector into the police. I think that could be a really effective way of solving a problem, at least
You
on the
see,
short term.
but it also then forces a greater sense of discipline among the private security companies as well. Because right now, within these private security companies, and as you correctly point out, they outnumber the police forces by a significant factor. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the personnel who are driving these things are all cut from the same cloth. And the potential problems around that, particularly if you have armed response, which is what we all pay for. It's one thing to be armed. Okay, it's another thing to be able to use a firearm correctly. And more importantly, it's another thing to know when to use a firearm. Because you don't want someone who's trigger happy, who's, immediately going to draw his weapon and do something that's entirely untoward. And, I myself have been a victim of that particular thing, where an armed response person came into my property and my dog lunged at him, and he immediately drew his firearm and shot the dog. Now, this was close on 20 years ago now, and it's still something that tears me apart, because it was so utterly unnecessary. But it comes down entirely to a question of, was this person trained to respond correctly in that particular scenario? And so, yes, we have private security precisely because of the fact that the services that we pay for as taxpayers and as ratepayers don't work. But at the same time, we have these, they are regulated to some extent. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in any level trying to throw shade at our private security industry, because I think, frankly, they are pretty much best in class compared to the rest of the world. But
Sure.
at the same time, I'd feel a lot better if there was an independent oversight body that one would be able to then refer people to in order to get, investigations underway, in order to ensure that they are complying with the basics of what one would expect. But these actually
Right.
require that the people in power understand what they are doing.
Right. No, of course, yeah, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to say. We can at the same time say, look, we're grateful for what we have, but there's always that room for improvement, and so let's do that, because unfortunately these sorts of incidents do happen, and
Sure,
yeah, we
but there's
need
the other
to.
elephant in the room far too often we actually ignore, which is roughly about a third of our police force is committed to the VIP protection units, which effectively
A
means
third.
that yes,
That's huge.
it's absolutely huge, and it's an utter disgrace.
My God. So would that basically include all the blue light brigades, or is that something
Absolutely
else?
includes all of the VIP protection units, the blue light brigades. Yep, all of those.
My God. And then I guess there's also the other segment, right, of police officers. However, not so much the police officers that are out responding, but rather those, on the admin desks working behind the scenes. So I wonder how many police officers there are who are actually out in the field. I'm a
Well,
little bit worried to get that number.
you see, the other controversial viewpoint that I expressed was that police officers need to pass a body mass index test. And my view on this is that a police officer who is not able to run 100 meters chasing a criminal has no business being a police officer. Very simply,
That's exactly
because
right.
yeah, but if you look at police officers across the country right now, uniformly they are grossly overweight. And there needs to be the starting point of saying that if you do not actually maintain a basic level of physicality, you should not be able to be a policeman on the ground. It's an entirely different thing for
Right.
detectives, which is, a question of investigating and following up. But if you are a police officer who is on the beat and you're carrying a firearm and you are expected to be apprehending criminals, at very least, for the love of God, please ensure that they're able to meet the basic levels of physical fitness. This is not too much to ask for.
Right. I don't even know, Kanthan, that's just, some people are just overly woke. I don't understand how that's a controversial point. I mean, one of the most basic pieces of understanding when it comes to policing is that this is a physical job. If somebody is going to not cooperate with you, if somebody is going to attack or have a weapon, and we know what can happen when people are inebriated, I mean, surely having the right sort of physical fitness would make a lot of sense. I mean, and I'm not quite sure when it was. I'm pretty sure this was actually on multiple occasions, but I've read reports of police officers who get hospitalized and have even died from overheating and dehydration on runs. I just can't believe that this is something that happens. So,
Well, the
needless
fact
to
is
say,
that these are not quantified in the employment practices, and obviously one needs to look at this in the context of our labor laws in this country, which go out of their way to prevent discrimination at a number of levels. But the fact is that
right.
fundamental level of physical fitness is part of the job description, and it's not dependent on your race, color, or creed, but it is dependent on your ability to be able to run that 100 meters after the perp. It really is as simple as that.
Right. Right. No, that is actually I mean, 100% valid point. But I'm starting to see a pattern in our conversation, right? Which is that really what we need in the police seems to be this solid, codified barrier to entry. So the BMI situation, as you explained, perhaps physical tests that actually have to be passed. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the literacy requirements. I mean, how we have police officers who aren't able to handle that is beyond me.
And
But
advanced
yeah,
driving tests.
and advanced driving tests,
Yes.
another important point.
So
Yes,
if you there's if you look across the course of the past 30 years, there's an astonishing number of politicians that have been killed in accidents when being driven by their VIP protection services. Now,
okay,
you, now you consider that these VIP protection people, they always are driving above the speed limit and they're always driving dangerously. And these are entirely inappropriate things to be doing. The fact of the matter is that the reason why we have speed limits for the bulk of the populace is because of the fact that there's a safety factor that's involved. And when you have these
yes,
VIP protection units that are able to ride roughshod over them, the laws of physics are going to kick in. And consider that most of these people who end up in these positions have actually not studied physics. So again,
right,
the cases where, I remember there was this particular case of a politician. I'm not going to mention the person's name, where they were driving on the N3 down to Durban, and the vehicle rolled, and the politician's wife died because she was ejected from the vehicle. And why was she ejected from the vehicle? Well, she was not wearing a seatbelt. Because whenever you hear of someone being ejected from a vehicle, it's the first thing you say. Why was this person not wearing a seatbelt? Now, it was the
right.
responsibility of the VIP protection unit person who is driving the vehicle to be saying, hey, you need to be wearing a seatbelt. You go back to the
Sure.
death of Princess Diana on 31st August 1997. The only person who survived the crash was the person who was wearing a seatbelt.
Wow. I mean, that's a valid point. And again, just a glaring oversight
Morgan
from
Changarai,
the
the former prime minister of Zimbabwe, again,
of
his vehicle
Zimbabwe.
rolled. His wife died. She was not wearing a seatbelt. These are simple things.
Well, they are. And I guess that just begs the question of where are the checks and balances?
But
Yeah,
it starts with
Kanthan,
having those
it's
police officers who actually, understand the basic laws of physics. And
right,
yes, unfortunately, our
right.
ministers don't.
Yes, yes, and that's a kind of what's making me extra stressed, yeah, Kanthan. The deeper we go into this, the more we realize just how problematic the situation really is. But look, obviously we've unpacked quite a lot, particularly on the economic and policing front. So I'd like to actually know if you had to look at all of the issues that South Africa faces, right? What do you think would be the most pressing issues that have to be addressed now? So, as a matter of urgency, in order to turn the place around.
Um, it comes back to the cost of energy, Matthew, and everything actually derives from the cost of energy, because the cost of energy just simply unlocks the economy at every conceivable level. And when we have the ability to be self-sufficient in terms of energy, and we are deliberately shooting ourselves in the foot by not taking advantage of it, really
Right.
there's no excuse for it. It has to start there, because um, and I think perhaps the way we should be steering the discussion is by pointing out to our politicians that if we have an unbelievably rich country, then there's more money for them to steal, and they'll be far more prosperous than they currently are. So actually unlock the energy supplies of the country, let the entire country be prosperous. And then if you want to be stealing your billions, it's not going to impact us because the overall quality of life has actually been improved. And, I'm not saying this at any level to justify, theft from the public purse. But there has to
Right.
be a way to give our politicians an incentive to actually unlock this energy that's literally lying under our feet. By the way, another interesting point was a while ago I did a comparison in terms of if we were to buy oil from Russia in defiance of U.S. sanctions, and if the U.S. was going to end up killing AGOA, well, of course, AGOA is now completely off the table, and
we
I actually
saw
ran
to
the.
that.
Yes, yeah, I know. Thank you. Another own goal. Thank you so much. Yeah, okay. But I did a rudimentary calculation, is that if we were to go to say, all right, kiss AGOA goodbye, and at that time I was calculating on the basis of the US potentially hitting us with at least a 10% tariff. And if we were to then buy oil from Russia instead of buying oil from Saudis, we would have a savings of 4.1 billion US dollars per year that would accrue to the country. So, again, it's a question of a lot of us have very strong feelings about Russia. But the fact of the matter is that we should always be putting the interests of the country first at a number of levels. And that means actually juggling those various checks and balances. So India, for example, has said to the US, yes, we're going to take your tariffs, but we're still going to buy oil from Russia, because we would rather have the cheap oil from Russia that is keeping us afloat as a country and allowing us to have 7 or 8% economic growth per year. My God, think of it. 7 or 8% economic growth per year, and the compounding effects of that over a 5-year period is huge.
Massive.
So we really need to be starting to think differently about this. And it comes back to the fundamental cost of energy. Some promising things that are happening in surrounding countries. I mean, Namibia, for example, is now launching pebble bed modular reactor projects that are being driven by South Africans. This is a win for us. Fantastic. Well done, guys. And we need to be bringing those projects here. I mean, we've done it before. We built Coburg with our own resources. Why do we need to be waiting on the rest of the world in order to be doing things? But again, there are so many things that need to be overturned. Regulatory hurdles, the courts in particular, need to be put in check. And until we have Parliament speaking in one voice and recognizing that energy is the key to prosperity, I think that we are hiding to nothing. But what we can do as individuals is pretty much what a lot of our fellow South Africans have done, is, invest in solar panels and batteries, and as far as possible, get yourself off grid. And, the prices are just kind of plummeting by the day. I was wandering through Leroy Merlin for the first time in about 5 years yesterday, and I was looking at the price of solar panels, and a 580 watt panel is now 1,700 Rand.
Not bad at all.
Yeah, so think about that. Okay, you're getting a kilowatt for 3,000 Rand. So 18,000 Rand is giving you, I mean, most people have a 3 kilowatt supply from Eskom. Okay, so 18,000 Rand is giving you a 3 kilowatt supply. Toss in 8,000 Rand for an inverter, and for less than 30,000 Rand, you're effectively off grid when the sun is shining. Then add battery cost to that, and it's the way to go. And then you're saving all of that money that you would otherwise be spending on Eskom.
Right. So, well, thanks for that piece of advice. I think that's definitely something that a lot of people will take to heart if they haven't already. And I think the message is pretty clear, Kanthan. We've got to, well, not that they ever listen, but we've got to basically tell those politicians, listen, guys, enough is enough. Energy is the way forward. Forget about the UN sustainability goals. And at the end of the day, even if it's something that bothers you, we are certainly not the biggest contributor to that, not by a country mile. So I think, yes, that's definitely a very clear path forward. And if we just somehow learn to grab it at the opportunity, we can get there. But Kanthan, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today. I certainly enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that the audience found it just as stimulating as what I did. So thanks. I appreciate your time.
It's an absolute pleasure. And like I said, the book's available at most good bookstores. Go out and get yourself a copy. And hey, if you can improve upon the ideas there, I really would like to hear those. And when I do the next iteration of the book, I'll be very happy to include those as well. There's a substantial list of acknowledgements at the back where, I drew on the expertise of a range of people, who gave me really solid advice. Michael Jordan, who's one of our foremost entrepreneurs in this country, was kind enough to write a foreword to the book as well, and I'm very grateful for him for offering his insight. He's done amazing things in terms of telecommunications with RAIN, with banking in the form of Bank Zero, and what I'm saying is there's lots of people in this country of ours who have fabulous ideas and expertise, which they'll gladly bring to bear in service of this country. And we really should be tapping into that. So, but thanks for the opportunity, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Of course. And on that note, I think it's best that we all take some of these fantastic ideas in the book and get it to our political parties and make our politicians aware. There we go. So for anybody who is interested in buying the book, we'll certainly be sure to include a link to the website in the description box below. And until next time, I'm Matthew, and this is Power and Politics.
Cheers.